Welcome everybody to the July Co-working Idea Challenge. My name is Ashley Proctor. I am a settler on Turtle Island, and I'm joining you today from Seattle, which is on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, more specifically the Suquamish, the Duwamish, the Stillaguamish, and the Muckleshoot. And I run Co-working Canada and Creative Blueprint, but what I'm here to do today is to introduce you to the Co-working Idea Project and to this month's facilitator. So the Co-working Idea Project is an international collective of co-working operators and associations, various community organizers, and collaborative consultants. And we are all committed to making the co-working industry more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and accessible. And we believe that by working together collaboratively, internationally, we can have a ripple effect throughout the industry and around the world. And we believe that our actions matter within our organizations, within our communities, within our co-working spaces and our businesses. We each have the opportunity to make decisions, and we often have the opportunity or the privilege of a platform that we can access, or larger networks that we can influence by changing our behavior and by leading by example. So today's Co-working Idea Challenge will be facilitated by Dr. Cyrus Marcus Ware. And we are going to be talking about how to bring abolition into co-working spaces, how to create healthy ecosystems, and conflict resolution. So I'm going to hand things over today to Cyrus to issue this month's Co-working Idea Challenge and talk a little bit more about these subjects. So thank you so much for joining us, Cyrus.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Cyrus Marcus Ware. I'm an artist, an activist, and a scholar, and I'm based in Takarondo, colonially known as Toronto. I'm particularly in the part of Takarondo that was underwater at the time of the Toronto Purchase, making this the unceded territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. This is Three Fires territory. This is a territory that's been home to several great peacekeeping systems, including the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. It's really an honor to get to be here, and I'm in support of land back and Indigenous resurgence here in these territories, but across Turtle Island and around the world. So it's really great to be here today, and I'm so excited for the chance to talk a little bit about abolition and how it might play out in a co-working space. So abolition is this radical idea that isn't that radical at all, which just basically says that we should be able to treat each other with kindness. We should be able to come up with new ways of responding to conflict, crisis, and harm without relying on the state and in particular policing to solve our issues. It recognizes that police and prisons don't make our community safer or more secure, and that in fact, when we talk about abolition and abolishing things like the police force, we're not talking about abolishing community safety. We're in fact talking about increasing community safety, in particular for those communities who have been targeted by the police and who face regular interactions. So what does this mean for a co-working space? Well, we're working together, we're working collaboratively, we're working independently, and things come up. Things come up when we're working together in a space. Sometimes it's conflict, it may be an emotional crisis, and even in some cases, sometimes there's harm that happens in these environments. And what we have to figure out is, how do we respond outside of carceral logics, outside of these logics that say we need to cage people, we need to confine people, and that's how we create safety? Because we know that that's not true, and we know that that's not working. That's not how it's played out. Police and prisons are a relatively new phenomenon in human history. They grew out directly out of the experience of slave labor camps. The police were a force that grew out in the States out of slave catcher patrols, and here in Northern Turtle Island in Canada, the RCMP was created in particular to clear the land of Indigenous people to make way for settler expansion. So the policing system is rooted in white supremacy. Its origins are rooted in white supremacy. Why we think that they would be the best people to come to a safer space, like a co-working space, to resolve conflict, I don't know. Because of course, when they arrive, conflict increases, stress increases, and usually some pretty terrible things happen. So, and prisons as well. Prisons grow out of, this idea of slave labor camps where we abolish the concept of slavery, which is why we use the word abolition, in particular, because it draws to this push to abolish slavery, and slavery was only negatively abolished. It was allowed to continue through incarceration. So all of the conditions of the slave labor camp were allowed to continue in incarceration in incarcerated spaces. So why would we want to continue pushing these systems and bringing them into our work? So what are the alternatives? There are so many incredible alternatives to responding to conflict, crisis, and harm that we can come up with together. And one of those ways is a co-working space. I mean, we're already doing the work of changing the way that we interact with each other in society. So thinking about when a conflict happens, how do we make sure that everybody who's involved in the conflict is able to bring their full selves into unpacking it and create the conditions where you can kind of better understand each other and better hear and better listen. When there's a crisis that happens, people go through mental health crisis all the time. I mean, that's just a phenomenon. We also work as independent workers, often under very stressful conditions with high pressure, high stakes. And that can lead to, particular kinds of crises. We know that when the police come into what they call a wellness check or an emergency check, when someone is in an emotional crisis, things usually go terribly wrong. Either the person gets more agitated and more upset, and then sometimes there's interactions with the police that, at their worst lead to a fatality, and maybe at a little bit of a less worst scenario lead to the person being incarcerated in a psychiatric detention facility. That's not resolving crisis in a way that I think we want to be doing in our communities. We can be responding to crisis in different ways, where we root and listen to mad people who have been labeled with mental health diagnoses. We listen to mad people and we take direction from mad people about how they want to be responded to when they're in a moment of crisis. So we work together and we say, well, Merwell, here's my mad map. Here's what I want to see happen if I, am experiencing a moment of crisis. And we create those together in advance. So a lot of what I'm saying here is prior and proper planning prevents piss poor performance, as my dad used to always say, but planning ahead. Humans are going to get into conflict. Crises are going to happen. And if we can try to unpack and undo some of this before it turns to a case of harm. So anyways, what does this mean in the everyday life? We can invest in community building. We can invest in community supports. One of the things that we've been pushing for, I'm a co-founder of Black Lives Matter Canada, and we've been pushing for this concept of defunding the police. And what that means is that we actually are taking the sort of bloated police resources. They keep getting salary increases year after year, despite killings and all of the violence that they're putting out in society. We take some of those funds and we reinvest them into our communities. And we could reinvest them into spaces like co-working spaces, so that they're well resourced, so that they have everything that they need in order to thrive, so that participants are able to come and use and access all the facilities. But we also invest in libraries and parks and community centers and programs in our communities and other resources that give people things to do and jobs and opportunities to be able to live free. So there's a lot of possibility, but what I would love for people to think about for this challenge is, what do we do when conflict arises in our co-working space? Do we have a do not call the police policy, or do we have a policy where we do call the police? And if we do, how do we keep our members, particularly racialized, disabled, deaf and mad, queer and trans members, safe when the police arrive? So what would it look like to create a policy, a no police policy? And what would you need to put into place in order to have people on hand to respond to conflict in the moment so that you don't have to rely on going to the state and bringing them into a situation that is only going to escalate? So that's something that you can start to think about, is like, what do we do when conflict happens? How do we respond to crisis? Do we have a crisis intervention team? Do we have people in our space who are trained at de-escalating, someone who's in crisis, and calming the situation and bringing them into sort of a sense of peace and tranquility? And if we don't, who can we bring in to train us on how to do that and on how to do crisis management, so that we're not, again, creating the conditions where people who are in emotional crisis have to have the scary reality of a uniformed police officer talking to them and sometimes at worst, being aggressive towards them. So there's lots of things to sort of think through, but my challenge is, how do you bring abolition into your co-working space and create the conditions where everyone is going to feel safe coming and participating and engaging, because they know that they're not going to be harassed by the police, and they know that when a conflict, crisis, or at worst harm happens, that it's going to be responded to with care, with love, with mutual aid, with interdependence, with collective care. There's so many great resources that I can point you to on how to do this in a good way. First of all, reading The Principles of Disability Justice by Patty Byrne, which and Since Invalid, which sort of talks about the need for us to be interdependent, and talks about what mutual aid and collective care can look like. And then Black Lives Matter created a website called defundthepolice.org, and it has great resources on exactly how to do some of this stuff. How do we unpack conflict in a good way? How do we respond if someone's bag gets taken from the co-working space? How do we respond to the practical things that may or may not come up in these situations? Defundthepolice.org has a whole bunch of great resources and information on how to do that. And then there's also this incredible blog that was created by Chanel Gallant and her collaborator in Los Angeles. I'm forgetting her name, and it's called Abolition Every Day. And it basically just is a blog post with tons of interviews with people about how to live abolition in your everyday life. So from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep, how to just build it into your framework. And that might be useful to look at in terms of thinking about, how do I live abolition in my everyday co-working life? And how do I bring abolition and my ideas of abolition into these spaces? So that's my challenge, is how to bring abolition into these spaces. And remember, we are creating community safety by removing the police. We are not abolishing the police does not mean abolishing community safety. It means increasing safety, particularly for communities that have been marginalized and targeted by the police. And so, really thinking that through. If we are going to move into the kind of future, the one that we're dreaming of, this future where trans people get to live long enough to become elders, where disabled, deaf, and mad people have what they need to thrive and to live fully and participate fully in society, where queer and trans people, can use any washroom and can access all these kind of spaces. If we're building this kind of world that we're trying to move into, we have to be able to come together and figure out how to deal with the most basic things, like what happens if we're just not getting along? What happens if we aren't getting along? And learning how to respond to conflict so that we can show up for each other in better ways. This is how we're going to get to this kind of future. One of the things that has been said about abolition is there's no blueprint. There's no model for how to do this. That's not exactly true. Abolition has been practiced, and forms of abolition have been practiced in a lot of communities all over the world for a very, very, very long time. And if you look, I mentioned the great peacekeeping systems that were here in these territories, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Dishwithlun Wampum. There are lots of examples of ways that people have decided to share space, live in space, be together, that is rooted outside of carceral logics. And we can turn to those and we can learn from those. But we also get to dream. We also get to be speculative fiction thinkers, and we get to dream, what do we want 2040 to look like? If not relying on the police, what do we want co-working in 2040 to look like? How do we want to respond to these things? So we also get to dream and create something that maybe hasn't been imagined yet. And that's, I think, where the work is, and that's what I'm excited to do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. In addition to being one of my favorite humans, I learn something from you every single time you speak, and I really appreciate you sharing this challenge and the resources as well with our co-working communities. And I think you really hit on some of the most important subjects here. In addition to sometimes feeling overwhelmed by a topic like abolition, you really brought it home how simple it could be to just work it into the day-to-day in our spaces and the ways that we already draft a code of conduct or policies for how we handle different issues in our space. This is just taking it one step further and making sure our values are woven into our policies and our communities as well. And I think it's a great catalyst for a conversation in all of our co-working communities this month to be talking about this with our members, to be talking about this within our alliances and collectives, and to really dive deeper into this topic. I think it's so essential, especially if we are building out these communities to be more inclusive, more diverse. We also must make sure that they are safe spaces for everyone. And you've done a really incredible job of outlining the scale and scope of that challenge. So thank you. And I really, really am looking forward to hosting the conversation at the end of the month, where folks can come and learn more and talk about their experience taking the challenge this month, maybe share some of the information or resources they've also discovered, and we can unpack some things together. So thank you again, Cyrus. Appreciate your time and all your knowledge here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. One thing I will just say is August 10th is Prisoners' Justice Day. It's a day to recognize the harms that have been caused by the police and prison system. So as you're thinking through this challenge in July, maybe start to think about, how you're going to move forward into August, into this month of prison abolition. August is a month to really think about prison abolition. So hopefully planting the seed this month will give you some things to think about for August.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.